There is a kind of goodbye that is unannounced, that leaves no visible scar, that makes no noise when it happens, but that divides your life into two irreconcilable halves. Who you were before that person left your life, and who you became after they never came back the way they were. And Simone Weil, the French philosopher who lived only 34 years but understood the nature of human loss with a clarity that most of us spend our entire lives avoiding facing, knew that there is something more painful than losing someone, and that something is the illusion that people can come back intact after certain departures. Have you ever felt this? Have you experienced this specific pain of meeting someone you loved again and realizing that the person in front of you wears the same face, answers to the same name, but is no longer who they were? Something essential has been lost, something you can't name but miss with every fiber of your being. And perhaps what hurts most is not even the physical absence, but this phantom presence of someone who technically came back but essentially never came back. Returned, Simone Weil would call it a form of affliction, not the ordinary suffering that hurts, but passes, but the kind of pain that alters the structure of your soul, that changes the way you inhabit the world, that forces you to accept a brutal truth that modern society has taught you to avoid at any cost. Some goodbyes are final even when people are still alive, even when you still see each other, even when love technically still exists, but has turned into something unrecognizable. And you keep searching the eyes of that person, the reflection of who they were. You keep waiting to hear in their voice the familiar intonation that no longer exists. You keep looking for signs of return that will never come, because the truth that Simone Weil discovered, and that will completely transform the way you understand loss and love, is this: people don't come back because people can't go back. Each experience transforms us irreversibly. Each pain resculpts us. Each distance recreates us. And to pretend that someone can go through life, suffer, grow, change, and then simply return to the way they were, is to deny the very nature of time and human transformation. Have you noticed how we get stuck in this impossible wait? How we build mental altars for versions of people who no longer exist? How we refuse to accept that that childhood friend, that love from years ago, that family member who moved away, will never be who they were again, even if one day they cross your path again. Because the person you love today is no longer the same as yesterday. And the person you lose today was already different from what they were when you met them. And Simone Weil lived this in the flesh, experienced it. On her own skin, this pain of seeing people move away, transform, return unrecognizable, and instead of running away from this terrifying truth, she dove into it with a courage that few possess. She looked directly into the abyss of human impermanence and found there not despair, but something much more radical. Something that can change your relationship with each person you love, and with each goodbye you will still face. And if you feel that these words are touching a wound that you didn't even know was open, if you recognize this pain of waiting for someone who technically came back but essentially disappeared, so subscribe to this channel now, because we are going to explore together one of the most painful and most freeing truths that Simone Weil left us. We are going to go through this pain of accepting that people change, that returns are never complete, that some versions of the people we love die while they are still alive. And you won't want to miss what comes next, because this journey through Weil's philosophy on loss, transformation, and radical acceptance will teach you not how to recover who is gone, but how to love what remains, even when everything has changed. Because there is something sacred about accepting that life goes on, but never in the same way after a true goodbye. And that acceptance, however brutal, is the only path to a form of love that survives the transformation itself. But before we get there, before we understand how Simone Weil found peace in the midst of this devastating truth, we must first honor the pain you are feeling right now. Because without fully acknowledging what hurts, without naming the wound, without looking directly at it, there is no way possible through her. And Weil knew this better than anyone. She knew that the first act of courage is not overcoming pain. It is admitting it completely. So let's start right there, in the place where it hurts the most, in the moment you realize that the person has returned but is no longer the same. In the moment you understand that certain changes are irreversible and that the past that you so desire to relive no longer exists anywhere in the universe, not even in the memory of the person you lost, because they too have changed the way you remember them. They also carry a different version of that time, and perhaps you are both mourning different versions of the same relationship that no longer exists for either of you in the way it once did. And this brutal awareness that even shared memories fragment and transform, is one of the loneliest pains a human being can experience. You are feeling it now. This feeling that even when you try to explain to someone what you have lost, words cannot reach the depth of the void, because what is gone is not just a person. It is a version of yourself that only existed in the presence of that version of them. And when it changed, that part of you died too. And now you are inhabiting a body that carries memories of someone you are no longer, memories of conversations that no longer make sense, of jokes that are no longer funny, of gestures that have lost meaning. And the person who came back different looks at you too and perhaps sees the same thing. Someone who uses your face but is no longer who they remember. And the two of you are there, physically present but essentially absent, trying to force a connection that no longer fits the people you have become. And Simone Weil would say that this is a form of affliction because it not only destroys the present, it also destroys the past by revealing that that time you idealize was perhaps never as perfect as your memory insists on painting. And it destroys the future by showing that certain paths can never be taken again. Certain conversations will never happen again. Certain laughs will never resonate in the same way again. And you are stuck in that temporal limbo where the past is inaccessible. The present is painful, and the future seems empty of real possibilities of reconnection. This is the wound. This awareness that life has gone on, but never in the same way, that people have returned, but never completely, that love still exists, but has turned into something you don't know how to hold, how to name, how to live. And maybe you are now at that stage where you still try to force, still try to make the old person emerge from the new person, still look for signs of return, still hold on to rare moments where it seems like her old self shines through for a few seconds before disappearing again. And each of these glimpses gives you hope and destroys you at the same time, because they confirm that that person still exists somewhere but chooses not to appear anymore, or worse, can no longer appear even though she wants to, because the experiences she has lived, the pain she has gone through, the changes she has undergone have created layers upon layers that now separate her from who she was, and you don't have access to those layers. You don't know what happened in the months or years of absence. You didn't witness the gradual transformation, so for you it was as if she had disappeared in one way and reappeared in another, as if it were cruel magic, as if the universe had replaced the person you love with an imperfect copy. And the cruelest thing of all is that no one around you fully understands why technically the person came back. Technically they are still there. Technically you should be happy, but you are not. You are mourning someone who is still breathing. You are mourning a death that no one recognizes as death anymore. And Simone Weil knew intimately this specific form of loneliness, this pain of losing someone who everyone thinks you still have, and it was precisely through that pain, without running away from it, without trying to console her prematurely, without looking for easy answers or manufactured optimism, that she discovered something that could change everything for you. But to get there, to access this brutal and liberating wisdom, you must first stop resisting what is, stop fighting the reality of transformation, stop demanding that the universe give back what is already gone. And that is infinitely more difficult than it seems, because it means accepting that that version of the person that your loved one has died, that relationship you had is over, that future you imagined will never exist, and that acceptance is not passive resignation. It is not cowardly giving up. It is the most courageous act a human being can perform, It is looking directly at the impermanent nature of all things, including the people we love, including ourselves, and choosing to love anyway, but in a completely new way, in a way that Simone Weil spent her entire life trying to articulate and that we will now explore together, starting with deeper recognition of what really happens when someone changes, because understanding the mechanics of human transformation is the first step in stopping fighting it and starting working with it. And Weil had an almost surgical understanding of how experiences shape people, of how suffering rewrites identities, of how distance creates chasms that no longer exist. A physical bridge can be crossed. She knew that when someone goes through certain experiences alone, when they go through certain hells without you by their side, something fundamental breaks in the possibility of you reconnecting in the same way, because that person now carries knowledge that you don't have, scars that you didn't see form, fears that you didn't witness being born. And all these unshared experiences create an existential distance that is much deeper than any geographical distance. You can be in the same room and feel that there is an ocean between you. It can to be looking into her eyes and feel like you're looking at a stranger. You can be touching her skin and feel like you're touching a ghost, because what makes a person who they are is not just their body or their name. It's the specific constellation of experiences, memories, traumas, joys, transformations that they carry, and when that constellation changes radically, the person changes radically, and there is no amount of love or desire or shared memories that can reverse this process. And perhaps that is the hardest truth you will ever have to face. Swallow. You have no power over her transformation. You can't make her go back to who she was. You can't undo the experiences that changed her. You can't erase the scars that marked her. You can't reverse the growth or regression she experienced away from you. All you can do is decide how you're going to relate to this new version of her. Whether you're going to insist on loving the memory and rejecting reality, or whether you're going to have the courage to let go of the old version and get to know the current version. Even if this new version is less compatible with you, even if this transformation has created incompatibilities that didn't exist before, even if accepting who she is now means accepting that you may no longer be able to have the type of relationship you had before, and that terrifies you. Of course it terrifies, because it means that all the emotional investment, all the time dedicated, all the memories built could become irrelevant, could turn into dead weight that you carry but that no longer leads anywhere. And Simone Weil looked at this terrible possibility and didn't look away. She admitted that, yes, at some times people change in ways that make it impossible to continue the relationships we had with them. Sometimes the distance that is created is insurmountable. Sometimes the only act of love possible is to let go. But she also discovered something deeper, something that can only be seen when you completely stop fighting impermanence. And that is what we will explore now, going layer by layer into the Weilean understanding of human transformation, starting with the first and most obvious, but also most denied truth. Change is not optional. It is not a character flaw. It is not betrayal. It's simply what happens to human beings who remain alive and conscious. Each experience touches us and changes us. Each pain reforms us. Each joy rebuilds us. Each encounter adds something to us. Each loss subtracts something from us. And at the end of a year, 5 years, 10 years, the person you were is no longer. It has given way to someone new who carries traces of the old, but is not the old one. And you have also changed. You are also no longer who you were when you met that person. You also carry new scars, new fears, wisdom. And maybe the problem isn't that she's changed. The problem is that you've changed in different directions, at different speeds, through different experiences. And now you're trying to force a connection between two people who maybe never really met, because the version of you that loved the old version of her no longer exists. And the version of you that exists now is trying to love a version of her that also no longer exists. So you're both loving ghosts. You're bonding over memories. You're mourning the losses of people you both once were and no longer exist. They are. And this creates a layer of tragedy that is almost Shakespearean in its complexity, almost Greek in its inevitability, because even if you desperately want to, there is no way that two people who have radically changed can simply become compatible again just because they were compatible in the past. Compatibility is not permanent. It is not a guarantee. It is not a given. It is something that exists at a specific moment between two specific constellations of human characteristics. And when these constellations change, the compatibility can disappear, and insisting on maintaining a relationship based on compatibility that no longer exists is a form of violence against both. It is forcing fits that no longer work. It is pretending to recognize someone you no longer recognize. It is lying to yourself and to the other about the real nature of the connection that still exists or no longer exists. And Simone Weil, who dedicated her life to seeking and expressing truth without compromise, I would say that this lie, no matter how well-intentioned it is, no matter how much it comes from a place of love and despair, is a form of lack of love, because true love requires seeing the other person as they really are, not as you want them to be, not as they once were, not as you need them to be for your life to make sense, but as they are now, in this moment, with all the changes, with all the new wounds, with all the transformations that have made them different. And that kind of clear vision, this kind of attention, without the desire to change what you see, is what Weil called pure attention. And it is one of the most difficult practices a human being can do, because our natural instinct is to see in others what we need to see, to project onto others what we want them to be, to filter reality through our needs and fears and desires. But pure attention demands that you suspend all of that you look at the person in front of you without any agenda, without any expectations, without any prior narrative, and simply see who they are. And when you do this with someone you knew in a previous version, the shock can be devastating, because you finally see clearly how much they have changed. How much of that old person is really gone? How much of the connection you had was based on versions of you that no longer exist, and that clear vision can free you or destroy you depending on what you do with them. And this is where we begin the second descent, deeper, more painful, because now we are no longer just talking about their change. We are talking about your resistance to that change, your refusal to accept the which is, your desperate attachment to a version of the past that can no longer be recovered. And Simone Weil had a name for this. She called it gravity, the force that pulls us down, that holds us to what was, that prevents us from accepting what is. Gravity is the weight of the ego that insists on controlling, on possessing, on freezing time, on making the universe bow to its desires. And we all have that. We all feel that weight, especially when it comes to people we love, because loving someone creates an illusion of possession, a fantasy that person somehow belongs to us, that we are entitled to certain versions of them, that they owe us continuity, stability, recognition, and when they change in ways that exclude us, in ways that make our presence less relevant, in ways that invalidate our emotional investment, we feel it as betrayal, as injustice, as violation of an implicit contract we thought we had. But Weil would ask you a brutal question. What contract is that? Who signed it? When was it agreed upon? And why do you think you have the right to demand that another person remains frozen in a version of themselves just because that version was more convenient for you? This question is not cruelty. It is clarity. It is an invitation to see the subtle violence we commit when we demand that others stop growing, changing, transforming themselves just because these transformations bother us, scare us, leave us behind. And maybe what hurts most is not that she changed, but that she changed without you, that she grew in directions you didn't foresee, that she discovered parts of herself that you never knew, that she has become someone who doesn't need you in the way the old version did. And that is humiliating. It is terrifying, because it exposes a truth that we spent our entire lives trying to avoid. We are not as essential as we would like to be. People can survive without us. They can even flourish without us. They can transform in ways that make us irrelevant And accept that. Accept that you can become a footnote in the story of someone you considered the protagonist of yours. Accept that your absence in her life may have even been beneficial to her growth. Accept that maybe it's better now precisely because you weren't there to keep her trapped in old patterns. All of this requires a humility that cuts to the bone. A decreation of the ego that Weil described as necessary but excruciating. Because the ego feeds on narratives of importance, on fantasies of indispensability, on illusions of centrality. And when those illusions are shattered, when you are forced to see that that person you loved so much managed to transform, grow, even heal without your presence, something inside of you dies, and Weil would say that this death is necessary, that it is exactly this death of the inflated ego that makes room for a truer form of love, a love that does not need to be necessary to be real, a love that does not require reciprocity to maintain itself, a love that can exist even in the absence, even in irrelevance, even in the radical transformation of the other. But arriving at this type of love requires going through a psychological hell that most of us are not willing to face. It requires admitting that much of what we loved about love was actually need in disguise. It was emotional dependency, painted as devotion. It was fear of loneliness, masquerading as deep connection. And when a person changes in ways that expose those dependencies, when they become someone who can no longer fill the voids we expected them to fill, we are forced to face our own inner abysses, our own incompleteness, our own unhealed wounds that we projected onto them, hoping they would solve them. And they won't solve them. They can't solve them. They won't solve them. You're even more trying to resolve it because she's changed, she's grown, she's moved beyond the role you assigned her in your personal narrative, and now you're alone with your wounds, alone with your emptiness, alone with the impossible task of finding in yourself what you've always been looking for in another, and that brutal loneliness is where the third and deepest descent begins. Because now we're no longer just talking about her change or your resistance to that change. We're talking about the emptiness that reveals itself when you finally accept that she's not going to come back, that the version of her that you loved is dead, that the relationship you had is over, that the future you imagined will never exist, and you come face to face with the abyss of your own incompleteness, with the terrifying knowledge that you built significant pieces of your identity around this person and this relationship, and now those pieces are falling apart. And you don't know who you are without them. You don't know how to inhabit the world without the anchorage that connection provided. You don't know how to make sense of your story when one of the main characters became someone unrecognizable, and Simone Weil lived it, experienced in the flesh this dissolution of identity that happens when we lose not just people, but the versions of ourselves that only existed in the presence of those people. She knew intimately the vertigo of looking in the mirror and not recognizing who is looking back, because the person who is there is no longer who you thought they were. They already carry absences that defined them as much as the presences that formed them. And now the question that Weil would ask you is this: do you have courage to inhabit this void without trying to fill it immediately, without seeking substitutes, without creating comforting narratives, without escaping to distractions? You can simply stay with this feeling of falling apart and observe it with pure attention, without judgment, without trying to fix it, without promises that it will get better, just observing what it is like to feel your identity fragment, what it is to realize that you no longer know who you are, what it is to accept that perhaps you never really knew, and that the person you thought you were was just a temporary construct, sustained by circumstances that no longer exist, by relationships that no longer work, by versions of people who have died even though their bodies still walk the earth. But before we continue this descent into the depths of the abyss of transformation and loss, I would like to pause here and create a moment of connection with you, because there is something profoundly powerful about knowing that right now, as you go through these words about change and loss and fragmented identity, there are other people around the world going through the same issues, feeling the same pains, struggling with the same impossible truths. So tell me, leave it here in the comments. Where are you watching us from now? What is your city, your country? Because when you share this, you are not only helping me understand who is on the other side of this screen, you are creating an invisible community of people who have the courage to look at what hurts, who don't shy away from difficult truths, who are willing to go down with me to the bottom of this journey through Simone Weil's philosophy of loss, transformation, and what it means to love when everything changes. And maybe Weil, wherever she is now, would be smiling to know that her words continue to find souls brave enough to face the abyss of impermanence. So please tell me in the comments where you watch us from. And let's continue together this exploration of what happens when we accept that people come back different or don't come back at all, and that this, as much as it hurts, is the very nature of human existence. Because Weil discovered something extraordinary about this emptiness, about this sense of fragmented identity, about this pain of losing, not just the other but herself in the process. She realized that there is a crucial difference between the emptiness that consumes us and the emptiness that frees us, between the absence that destroys and the absence that makes space. And this difference is not in the nature of the emptiness itself, but in the way we relate to it, whether we resist or consent, whether we fight or inhabit, whether we try to fill it or whether we allow it to remain. Weil suggests something radically different, something which sounds impossible until you really try. She suggests that you inhabit the void, that you make friends with absence, that you learn to exist in incompleteness without desperately trying to become whole again, because completeness, she argues, is an illusion. We were never complete, not even when that person was here, not even when the relationship worked, not even when everything seemed to make sense. We were always fragments, seeking other fragments. We were always emptiness, trying to fill each other. We were always incompleteness, dancing together and calling. This is love, and there is nothing wrong with that. It is not failure or weakness. It is simply the human condition. But the problem arises when we confuse the temporary dance of two voids with permanent resolution of our incompleteness, when we begin to believe that that person completes us, that without them, we are less, that their presence is what makes us whole, because when we believe that, when we build our identity around that fantasy of completeness through the other, then when it changes, when it goes, when it turns into someone who cannot more dancing with ourselves in the same way, we don't just lose her, we lose ourselves. Or at least we lose the illusion of who we thought we were. And Weil would say that this loss of illusion, however painful it may be, is actually a gift. It's an opportunity to finally see ourselves without the filters, without the masks, without the comforting narratives. It's a chance to find a way of existing that doesn't depend on someone else remaining frozen in a specific version of themselves, that doesn't demand that the universe stop changing just because change scares us, that you don't need guarantees of permanence to allow yourself to love. And this kind of existence, this way of being in the world that Weil calls decreation, is not about becoming less human. It is about becoming more human, more real, more true. Because you finally stop pretending that it is possible to control, to possess, to freeze what is fundamentally uncontrollable, impossible to possess. In constant transformation, you accept that people change, that you change, that relationships change, that nothing remains, that everything flows. And that trying to grasp what flows is to guarantee suffering is like trying to hold water with your hands closed. The more you squeeze, the more it flows. But if you open your hands, if you allow the water to flow through them, you can still feel the water, you can still interact with it, but in a way that doesn't require it to stop being what it is. And maybe that's what love is, keeping your hands open, allowing the other to flow, change, transform, even move away, without it destroying you, without it invalidating the love that was there, without this making the time you spent together meaningless, because the meaning was not in the permanence, it never was. The meaning was in the dance while it lasted, in the encounter between two ongoing transformations that for a moment aligned, recognized each other, touched each other, and now the courses diverged. The transformations took you to different places, and that is sad. It is painful. It is legitimate to cry about it. But it is not a cosmic tragedy. It is not a personal failure. It is not a sign that something is fundamentally wrong with you or with it or with the universe. It's simply what happens when ever-changing beings try to connect. Sometimes the connections last, sometimes they don't. Sometimes people grow together, sometimes they grow apart. And no amount of love or effort or desire can guarantee one outcome over another. And accepting that, letting go of the need for reassurance, letting go of the fantasy of control, is what Weil calls consent. Consenting to the universe as it is, not as we would like it to be. Consenting to the transitory nature of all things, including the people we live in. We love, including ourselves. And this consent is not passive resignation. It is not depressed giving up. It is something much more active, much more courageous. It is choosing to continue loving, knowing that everything changes. It is choosing to continue connecting, knowing that every connection eventually transforms or ends. It is choosing to continue opening your heart, knowing that it will be broken again and again, and making these choices, living with this awareness, requires a form of strength that our culture does not teach, does not value, does not recognize, because we are taught to seek security, permanence, assurances. We are taught that true love lasts forever, that successful relationships are those that survive all changes, that if someone truly loves us, it should remain consistent, recognizable, accessible. But Weil saw through these comfortable lies. She saw that true love is what survives transformation itself. Not love that demands that the other remain the same, but love that can embrace the other in whatever version they become, even if that version is incompatible with the other. Ours, even if this transformation means that we can no longer be together the way we were, because love, in the Weilian conception, is not about possessing, controlling, maintaining. It is about attention, recognition, reverence for the other's being in their autonomous existence. And this type of love does not end when the person changes. It does not die when the relationship ends. It just transforms, takes on a new form, a form that is perhaps less emotionally rewarding, less comfortable, less recognizable as love according to the standards we have learned, but which is perhaps more true, more pure, freer, because it does not depend on anything in return. It does not demand presence. It does not demand reciprocity. It does not negotiate conditions. It simply loves, from a distance if necessary, in silence if that is the case, in memory if that is all that is left. And you might think that this sounds like cheap consolation, as a way of romanticizing loss, as an attempt to transform pain into something palatable, but Weil is not romanticizing anything. She is being brutally honest about what it means to love in a universe where nothing remains. She is offering not a cure for the pain, but a way of carrying the pain with dignity. A way of living with the open wound without letting it define you completely. A way of continuing to love even when love no longer seems to make sense. And this takes us to the heart of what Weil discovered about the pain of accepting that people come back different or not at all. She discovered that this specific pain, this affliction of losing someone who is still alive, of mourning a version of someone who still exists but has transformed, carries within it a lesson that can only be learned through of it. There are no shortcuts. There are no softer versions. You only learn this by completely going through the experience of loving someone who has changed so much that you can no longer recognize them. You only learn this when you come face to face with your own powerlessness, with your inability to make someone else be who they were, with the terrifying truth that you have no control whatsoever over the paths others choose, over the transformations they experience, over who they become, and the lesson. The brutal and liberating truth that emerges when you finally stop fighting. Against this reality is this: you are also free, free to change, to transform, to become someone new without needing the permission or approval of those who knew you in old versions, because if you accept that she has the right to change, you need to accept that you do too. If you recognize that she doesn't owe you continuity, you need to recognize that you don't owe anyone continuity. If you let go of the expectation that she remains recognizable to you, you also need to let go of the prison of remaining recognizable to her, to your family, to your friends, to anyone who knew you at a specific moment and now expects you to remain frozen in that moment. And that freedom, that permission to radically transform yourself is terrifying and liberating at the same time, because it means that you no longer have to carry the weight of being consistent, of making sense, of staying true to old versions of yourself that no longer serve you. You can die and be reborn as many times as necessary. You can completely reinvent yourself. You can become someone unrecognizable to those who knew you years ago. And not only is it okay, it's inevitable. It's necessary. It is what living beings do. They transform, they evolve, they sometimes regress, they always change. And trying to stop this is trying to stop life itself. It is choosing stagnation over growth. The known over the true, slow death over vibrant life, even if painful. And Simone Weil chose life, always, even when that choice took her to lonely, difficult, misunderstood places. She chose to radically transform herself throughout her short existence. She allowed each experience to shape her, each pain to reformed, each insight revolutionized her. And that's why people around her often didn't recognize her, didn't understand her choices, couldn't follow her in her transformations. But she didn't slow down so they could keep up. She didn't freeze so they could continue recognizing her. She followed the path of truth, even when that meant walking alone, even when that meant losing people. She loved because they couldn't or wouldn't keep up with her radical metamorphoses, and that courage, that willingness to prioritize truth over connection, transformation over comfort, growth over stability, is what allowed Weil to see so deeply into the nature of human existence. Because she wasn't protecting anything, she wasn't clinging to any version of herself, she wasn't trying to maintain any coherent narrative about who she was. She simply allowed the truth to transform her over and over again, and each transformation left her a little more alone, a little more misunderstood, a little more alienated from the people around her, but also a little freer, a little truer, a little more herself, in a sense that transcends any fixed identity. And maybe that's what she's inviting you to do now. Not to copy her life, not to follow her specific footsteps, but to have the same radical courage to allow the truth to transform you, to let go of versions of yourself that no longer serve you, even if it means losing people who can only love those old versions, to choose growth over recognition, authenticity over approval, life over stability. And yes, it will hurt. It will cost relationships. It will create distances. It will make you feel alone at times. But Weil would say that this loneliness is different from grief, because it does not come from being abandoned, but from choosing a path that few have the courage to walk. And in that chosen solitude, in that space created by your willingness to transform yourself, even if it leaves you temporarily without company, something extraordinary can happen. Something that Weil has experienced multiple times in her life, and that she tried to describe with words like grace, pure attention, impersonal love, decreation, concepts that seem abstract until you actually live them, until you experience what happens when you finally stop resisting your own transformation, when you accept that you are not and will never be a fixed, defined entity, when you embrace the fluid, transitory, eternally changing nature of your existence, and in that embrace, in that radical acceptance of the impermanence not just of others, but of yourself, you discover a way of existing that does not depend on anything remaining the same, that demands no guarantees, that does not need security, that can simply flow with what is, moment to moment, transformation after transformation, loss after loss, rebirth after rebirth. And that way of existing, however unstable it may seem from the outside, is actually the only real stability, because it is based on accepting what is always true, the constant change, rather than trying to hold on to what was never true, the fantasy of permanence. And when you live this way, when you really internalize the truth that people come back different or not at all, and that is simply the nature of things, something changes in the quality of your pain. It doesn't disappear. Will never promised it would, but it transforms. It stops being bitter resistance to reality and becomes just pure sadness for the transitory beauty of all things. Sadness for connections that were deep while they lasted. Gratitude for versions of people you knew, even though those versions no longer exist. Recognition that the time you spent together is not invalidated by the fact that you are now separated or unrecognizable from each other, because the value was not in the duration, it was in the depth. In fact, in the real encounter, even if temporary, between two beings in transformation. And those encounters, however brief, leave permanent marks. Change you in ways that you carry with you through all your future transformations. So that person, even if they have changed completely, even if they have left your life, even if they have become someone you no longer recognize, still lives within you in the ways they changed you, in the lessons they taught you without even knowing they were teaching you, in the parts of you that only exist because they existed in your life for a while, and that can never be taken away, ever. It can be undone. It is permanent in you even if everything else changes. Even if the two of you become completely different people than you were when you met, and perhaps recognizing that, honoring that, is a form of love that transcends physical presence, that survives all transformations, that can exist even when the person is gone or has changed so much that they have essentially become another person. You can still love what they were, what they gave you, what they awakened in you, without demanding that they go back to being that, without denying them who she is now, without trying to freeze in the past what she has already become in the present, and that delicate balance between honoring what was and accepting what is, between remembering who they were and recognizing who they have become, between keeping the memory alive and letting go of the expectation of return, is one of the most difficult practices that Weil invites us to perform, but also one of the most liberating. Because when you can do this, when you can simultaneously hold the sadness of loss and the acceptance of transformation, when you can love the memory without being tied to it, when you can wish the past had been different while at the same time completely accepting that the present is as it is, you achieve something that Weil would call clear vision. You see things as they are without the filters of desire or fear, without the distortions of ego or need. Just see. And in that seeing, there is a strange peace, not the peace of having what you want, but the peace of no longer being at war with what is, of no longer wasting energy trying to make the universe behave according to your preferences, of finally being able to rest in the acceptance that things are as they are and not as you would like them to be, and that acceptance is not giving up. It is not apathy. It is not a lack of love. It is actually the deepest love possible, because it is love that does not need to possess to be real, which does not need to be controlled to maintain itself, which does not need reciprocity to exist. It is love that can simply be, without demands, without conditions, without expectations. And yes, this type of love is lonely sometimes because you may be loving someone who doesn't even know you exist anymore. Someone who has changed so much that they don't remember you the way you remember them. Someone who has forgotten you or who keeps a distorted version of who you were. But even so, the love remains. Transformed but real. Distant but present. Silent but deep. And Weil experienced a lot of that kind of love. Love for people who couldn't or wouldn't receive it. Love for ideas that few understood. Love for a truth that most preferred to avoid. And this unrequited, unrecognized, unrequited love left her deeply lonely but also deeply free. Because she didn't need her love to be returned for it to be valid. She didn't need others to understand her for her truth to be real. She didn't need external validation to know that she was living up to her highest values. And this radical independence, this ability to maintain internal integrity without external support, is what allowed Weil to live so intensely, so truly, so completely in her 34 years than most achieve in a lifetime, because she was not wasting energy trying to make others stay the same, trying to make relationships last beyond their natural time, trying to freeze moments that were beautiful precisely because they were transitory. She simply lived each moment with undivided attention, loved each person with complete intensity, embraced each transformation with radical courage, and when it was time to move on, when it was time to let go, when it was time to accept that certain chapters had ended, she let go. She accepted. She moved on. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she understood that clinging to what was already over is a form of death. It's choosing to live in the past instead of being present in the now. It's betraying life for fear of change. And Weil loved life too much to betray it like that, so she kept transforming, kept letting go, kept loving new versions of herself and others. She continued to accept that nothing remains, and that precisely because nothing remains, every moment is precious, every connection is sacred, every transformation is an opportunity for rebirth. And now, having descended together to the depths of this understanding that people come back different or not at all, having explored the layers of pain, resistance, ego, fear, control, attachment that prevent us from accepting this truth, having seen how Simone Weil went through that same pain and found on the other side not despair, but freedom, not bitterness, but purest love, not destruction, but transformation, we now need to ask the practical question, the question that determines whether all this remains beautiful theory or becomes living practice. How do you actually do this? How do you live day to day with this brutal truth that someone you love has changed in ways that make it impossible to continue the relationship you had? How do you carry this wound without letting it consume you? How do you practice this radical acceptance without falling into depressive resignation? How do you keep your heart open, knowing that it will be broken again and again? Simone Weil, not only, she philosophized about this, she developed concrete practices, specific ways of working with attention, with emptiness, with pain, that can make the difference between sinking into grief and navigating through it. And these practices are not magical techniques. They won't make the pain go away. They won't bring back the person who is gone or the version of them that you lost. But they can give you tools to continue living with pain. Ignited, while carrying what seems impossible to carry, the first practice Weil would suggest is morning attention to the pain. Waking up and dedicating the first 10 minutes of the day just observing what hurts, not to fix, not to understand, not to solve, just to see clearly, to sit in silence and name internally what is present. Today the lack of her is here. Today the memory of who she was hurts. Today the knowledge that she will never return leaves me grounded, whatever it is. Just acknowledging without judgment or trying to. The solution. This practice is not about eliminating pain, but about developing the ability to be present with it, without being destroyed by it. It is learning that you can observe your own pain in the same way you would observe a river flowing. It is there. It is real. It is part of the landscape of your life in this moment. But it is not you. You are the observer. And this subtle distinction between feeling the pain and being the pain is crucial. Because when you completely identify with the pain, when you become the pain, there is no room for anything else. There is no perspective. There is no possibility of movement. But when you can observe the pain, when you can say, I feel sadness instead of I am sadness, you create a little space of freedom, a little breath where you still exist separate from what you are feeling. And in that space, in that breath, life is still possible. The second practice is attention to the beautiful in the midst of the ugly, when the pain is unbearable, when everything seems meaningless, when you are convinced that you will never feel anything but this pain again, finding something beautiful. It could be the sky, it could be music, it could be a poem, it could be the way the light hits the wall, and giving your full attention to this beautiful thing for 5 minutes is not a distraction. It is not an attempt to escape the pain. It is a reminder that reality simultaneously contains pain and beauty, loss and renewal, death and life, and you can choose where you direct your attention without denying what is there. Beauty does not cancel pain, but neither does pain cancel beauty. Both coexist. And when you practice attention to beauty, even in the midst of the deepest pain, you are training your ability to see completely, of not reducing reality just to what hurts, of recognizing that even in the worst moments there is still something worth observing. And this practice gradually expands your ability to be present to all of life, not just to the pain. The third practice is to release the narrative. Your mind tells stories about your pain. It will never come back. I will always be alone like this. I will never recover from this. I should have done it differently. If I had been better, it would not have changed. And these narratives repeat themselves in an infinite loop, gaining strength with each repetition, crystallizing into beliefs that you come to believe as absolute truths. But Weil would invite you to notice when you are creating these stories and gently let them go, not because they are false necessarily, but because they are just stories, interpretations, not facts. The practice goes like this. When you catch yourself creating narrative about pain, recognize that it is story, not fact, and return to the raw sensation without interpretation. Return to what really is, rather than what you think about what is, and do this repeatedly, hundreds of times a day if necessary, because the mind is story-creating machine, and it won't stop just because you asked it to. But you can develop the ability to not believe every story it tells. You can learn to distinguish between what you really feel and what you think about what you feel. And in that distinction, there is freedom. The fourth practice is to do without ego, to continue living, working, creating, loving, but without demanding that these activities fill the void left by the person who has gone. To do it because it is what there is to do, because life goes on, because you are still here, and while you are here, you need to do something, so you do it, but without expectation that doing it will heal you, without hope that if you work hard enough or create enough or love enough, eventually the pain will go away. You just do it. And there is something liberating in doing without seeking emotional reward. In acting without a secret self-healing agenda, it is decreation in action. It is doing without the ego seeking validation or relief through the doing. The fifth practice is to consent to the day upon waking before knowing what the day will be like, choosing to accept whatever comes. Pain, relief, both, none. Moments of peace, moments of anguish, memories that hurt, hours of temporary forgetfulness. Accept everything. Say internally accepted whatever this day brings. And when the day brings pain, as it inevitably will, remember that you consented. You will not be taken by surprise. You will not enter into a desperate struggle against what is. You will simply observe and feel and live through it. And this prior consent changes the quality of the experience. It does not make it less painful, but it makes it less traumatic. Because you are no longer being attacked by the unexpected. You are finding what you expected to find. The sixth practice is to write a letter to the pain. Once a week, sit down with paper and write to the pain as if it were a person. Dear loneliness, dear lack, dear void left by it. Thank you for what you are teaching me. I recognize the weight you represent. I ask for the strength to continue carrying you. This practice is not therapy. It is recognition. It is honoring that the pain is doing something in you, even if you do not fully understand what. It is creating a conscious relationship with the pain instead of just being a passive victim of it. And there is something powerful about personifying pain in this way, in treating it like a visitor who arrived uninvited but who still deserves recognition. The seventh practice is to be present to another even in pain. When you are with someone, to give your full attention to that person, not to their pain. Weil said that attention to another is the purest form of love, and it momentarily decrees us, takes us away from ourselves. And there is something deeply liberating in forgetting your own pain for a few moments while you really see and hear another person. It's not denying your pain. It's choosing not to let it be the only thing that defines your presence in the world. It's remembering that you can still give something even when you feel like you're completely empty. And often it's in that giving, without expectation of receiving, that something in you heals a little. Not because you were seeking healing, but because you temporarily stopped focusing only on your own wound. The eighth and final practice is nightly recognition ritual. Before bed, recognizing three things. A truth that the pain revealed today. It could be something small, Like today I realized that I can miss it, and yet, that's how it works. A moment of grace, however small. It could be 2 minutes of peace while drinking coffee. It could be a kind word from a stranger. It could simply be the fact of having survived another day and a choice to stay. The choice to wake up tomorrow and try again. The choice not to give up even when everything seems meaningless. And naming these 3 things creates a small ritual of gratitude that does not negate the pain, but also does not allow the pain to be the whole story. These practices are not a guarantee of transformation. They are not a magic formula. Some days you will be able to practice them. Other days it will seem impossible, and that's okay. Failing to practice is not failure, it's part of the process. Weil herself couldn't live perfectly what she taught. She fought, she suffered. She had moments of despair, but she kept trying. She kept practicing attention even when it seemed useless. She kept consenting even when everything in her wanted to resist. She kept loving even when love seemed to no longer make sense, and it was this persistence, not perfection, that gradually transformed her relationship with pain, that allowed her to find dignity in the wound, that enabled you to live fully, even while carrying immeasurable losses. And now, having explored the concrete practices that can help you live with this truth, that people come back different or not at all, there is only one thing left: to honor what you had the courage to face throughout this journey. To recognize that watching this video so far was an act of courage, because most people run away from these truths. They prefer to live in denial, in false hope, in perpetual resistance to the reality of transformation and loss. But you stayed, you looked, you allowed for these words to touch your wounds, and that already says something about you. Says that you have courage that few possess, courage to see things as they are, instead of as you wish they were. And Simone Weil would be among the first to recognize that courage, to honor that commitment to the truth even when the truth hurts, because that is the only way of living that she respected, to live with open eyes, with a vulnerable heart, with a willingness to transform yourself over and over again, no matter the cost. And you did that here, in this space. During this time, we spent together exploring the painful nature of human impermanence. So I recognize you. I see your courage. I honor your willingness to look into the abyss without looking away. And I want you to know that you are not alone on this journey of accepting that people change in ways that sometimes make them unrecognizable, that some returns are never complete, that certain versions of the people we love die while they are still alive. There are others walking this same path, feeling these same pains, struggling with these same impossible truths. And if you felt something shift inside you during these minutes we spent together, if any truth here resonated with a deep part of your soul that you barely knew existed, if you recognized your own pain in the words we explored, then leave a like on this video, because it shows me that these ideas are reaching from those who really need them. Those who have the courage to look at what hurts instead of continuing to run away, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey of exploring difficult truths through the philosophy of thinkers like Simone Weil. Because there is more to discover, more chasms to cross, more truths to face, and you don't have to do it alone. We can walk together through these questions that most avoid but that are essential to living a true life. The pain you carry is not a sign of weakness. It is evidence of that you loved deeply, that you truly connected, that you had the courage to let someone else matter. And yes, that means you also have to suffer when that person changes or leaves. But Weil would say that this suffering is the price of real love, and it is a price worth paying, because the alternative is to never truly love, to never connect deeply, to never allow someone to change you, and that would be death far greater than any pain of loss. It would be death of your ability to be alive, to be present, to be open. So you carry this pain, and you carry it with dignity, not because you chose to suffer, but because you chose to love. And true love always includes the possibility of loss, always includes the risk of transformation, always includes the chance that the person you love will become someone you no longer recognize. But even knowing that, even accepting that risk, you love anyway. and that willingness to love knowing that everything changes is the bravest thing a human being can do. It is decreation in its purest form. It is letting go of the need to control, to possess, to freeze the time, and simply be present with what is, moment to moment, transformation after transformation, loss after loss, love after love. And Simone Weil, who lived only 34 years but understood these truths more deeply than most dare in a lifetime, left you with this gift. The understanding that the pain of losing someone who changed is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something was very right. You loved someone free enough to grow, to change, to become who they needed to become, even if it meant become incompatible with you. And this type of love that frees instead of imprisoning, that accepts instead of controlling, that honors the autonomy of the other, even when it hurts you, is the only love that really deserves that name. So yes, it hurts. It hurts deeply when she comes back different or doesn't come back at all. It hurts to accept that the version of her that you knew and loved no longer exists. It hurts to recognize that the relationship you had has come to an end, even if you are both still alive. But in that pain, there is also beauty. There is also truth. There is also love in its purest form. And you can carry that. You can live with that. You can continue to love in spite of it, not in the same way, but in a new, deeper, truer way. A way that Simone Weil would recognize and honor, because it is a form of love that survives all transformations, that persists through all changes, that remains even when everything else transforms. And perhaps that is what she was trying to teach us all along, that the only love that truly lasts is love. That doesn't need anything to stay the same, that can embrace transformation, that can honor impermanence, that can say, I love you, not even though you change, but because you are free to change. And when you love in this way, when you finally let go of the need to control who the other becomes, something extraordinary happens. You too become free, free to change, to grow, to transform into who you need to be. And in that mutual freedom, in that dance of transformations, where no one is tied to remaining who they were, there is a form of love that transcends presence physical, that survives any distance, that can exist even when the two of you have become completely different people. Because it is not love for a specific version of the other. It is love for the other's being in its autonomous and constantly evolving existence. And that love, however lonely it sometimes is, however painful it often becomes, is the only truly free love, the only love that deeply respects the humanity of the other, the only love that Simone Weil would consider worthy of the name. So keep loving, keep transforming, keep accepting that people come back different or they don't come back, and that's okay, because life goes on, but never in the same way after a true goodbye. And in this transformed continuation, in this life that continues to carry all the losses and all the changes, there is still beauty, there is still meaning, there is still love. Only now it is a deeper love because it was tested by impermanence and survived. It was challenged by transformation and persisted. It was hurt by loss and still chose to continue. And VU, having gone through this journey with me, having looked directly at these painful truths, are now a little more prepared to live this love, to carry these losses, to accept these transformations, not because you have become stronger, but because you have become more true, more present, more able to see things as they are and still choose love, still choose connection, still choose life. And that is all that Simone Weil could ask for. All that she lived, all that she left us as a legacy, the courage to truly live in a world where nothing remains, where everything changes, where the people we love turn into strangers, and strangers sometimes become familiar only to turn again, and through it all, through all the changes and losses and transformations, to stay present, to stay mindful, to keep loving, because that's exactly what it means to be alive.